Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The sea was a restless beast that night, black as pitch and crowned with foam. The Black Betha creaked and groaned as she cut through the freezing waters north of Eastwatch by the sea. Lord Davos Seaworth stood upon her deck, cloak snapping in the wind, the scent of salt and pine heavy in the air. Winter was near, and with it came omens, red skies, dead fish washing ashore, and whispers of things stirring beyond the waves. It had been months since the fall of Stannis Baratheon at Winterfell. The fires had burned out, the banners torn, and the king's army scattered to snow and bone. Davos had survived, though he sometimes wished he hadn't. He had fought for honor, for justice, for the man he believed could save the realm, and all it had brought was ruin. Yet now, a raven had come to him at White Harbor. Its message bore the broken seal of House Baratheon. Help her, for the good of all. Find her. The parchment had been stained by seawater and ash, but the meaning was clear. Shireen Baratheon, sweet, clever, doomed Shireen, was alive, and she had been taken north, past the wall, to a place most sailors would rather drown than see. Skagos. The island loomed in every sailor's tale, a land of cannibals and horned beasts, of ancient gods that feasted beneath the ice. But now, men said something darker had awoken there. The wildlings spoke of a figure of shadow and flame who commanded storms, who rose from the earth when men shed blood in his name. They called him the Demon Lord of Skagos. Davos clenched his hands upon the railing as the wind howled around him. He did not believe in demons, not truly. But he had seen Melisandre's shadows, had watched them slay men as easily as breathing. The world was full of things that should not be, and Skagos might hold one more. "Land ahead," came the shout from the crow's nest. Through the mist, Davos glimpsed it, jagged cliffs rising like broken teeth, the gray waves shattering against them. A thin line of black sand marked the shore, and above it, pine forests stretched into white peaks lost to the clouds. He turned as footsteps sounded behind him. A tall woman emerged from below deck, wrapped in furs. Her hair was pale as snow, her eyes gray as the sea. Brynja, the wildling guide he had hired in Hardhome, moved with the quiet grace of a wolf. "You still mean to set foot there?" she asked, her voice rough from years of northern wind. "Skagos doesn't take kindly to strangers." "I've faced worse," Davos said, though his voice lacked conviction. She smirked faintly. "I've heard that before. They all said the same thing. None came back." Before Davos could answer, another man stumbled up from the cabin. He was broad-shouldered, his cloak marked with the faded chain of a maester, though most of its links were gone. Maester Orwyn, once of Old Town, now cast out for forbidden study. His hands trembled as he held a small flask to his lips. "By the gods, this cold could freeze a man's blood," Orwyn muttered. "Are you certain the girl's alive, my lord? There are better ways to die than chasing ghosts. I saw her once," Davos said softly. "I made her a promise. I'll not break it now." Brynja looked toward the shore. "Then we go at dawn. The tide's too rough tonight." But that night, Davos could not sleep. The wind beat against the hull like fists, and every creak of the ship sounded like a whisper. "Help her." The words echoed in his mind. Near dawn, he climbed to the deck again. The moon hung pale and sharp above the sea, lighting the waves in silver. And there, upon the shore, he thought he saw movement. A figure standing upon the rocks, tall, cloaked, watching. Davos blinked, and it was gone. When morning came, the Black Betha anchored in a narrow cove where cliffs rose sheer on both sides. The three of them went ashore with what provisions they could carry. The beach was strewn with bones, whale bones perhaps, or something larger. Brynja moved ahead, knife in hand, scanning the tree line. "This place smells wrong," she whispered, "like something old remembers us." They made for the forest, the snow crunching beneath their boots. Ravens cried above them, black shapes circling against the pale sky. The deeper they went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed to hush. Hours passed before they found the ruins. Stone walls half buried in frost, their shapes twisted with age. Brynja knelt by a broken carving. A stag, its antlers wreathed in flame. "Baratheon," Davos breathed. Someone had been here. In the center of the ruins lay a ring of blackened stones, scorched by fire. Orwyn knelt beside them, brushing away ash. "This was a ritual site," he murmured. "Blood and salt, fire and bone. Someone tried to call something here." Brynja tensed, her eyes darting to the trees. "We're not alone." Davos turned and saw figures emerging from the mist. Men draped in furs and bone, their faces painted red. Their eyes gleamed like coals. At their head stood a tall man with a crown of antlers and a blade of black steel. His voice was low and rough as gravel. "You should not have come, Seaworth," he said. "The girl is chosen. The blood of kings feeds the storm." Davos stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Where is she?" The man smiled, a cruel, broken smile. "She's with the Lord beneath the mountain, the one your false gods fear." A rumble passed through the earth beneath their feet. Somewhere distant, thunder rolled. Or perhaps it was something else. Brynja drew her blade. Orwyn whispered a prayer. And as the red-eyed men closed in, Davos knew the sea's warning had been true. The demon lord was awake. Snow began to fall as the wild men closed in. The flakes came heavy and fast, turning the forest white, muffling the sound of boots and blades. Davos drew his sword, its edge glinting faintly in the dim light. His heart thudded in his chest, not with fear, but with grim resolve. He had fought on ships against pirates, on walls against giants, and in halls of kings. Yet here, among the haunted woods of Skagos, he felt as though every shadow held a watching eye. Brynja moved like lightning beside him. Her dagger flashed once, twice, and two of the painted men fell without a sound. Orwyn crouched behind the ruins, fumbling with a pouch of powders that smelled of burnt herbs. "Keep them off me!" the maester hissed. "I can blind them for a moment, if I don't lose my hands first!" A spear shot toward Davos. He twisted aside, feeling the wind of it pass his cheek. He slashed in return, cutting the shaft clean in two. Another man lunged from the left, and Brynja met him with a snarl, driving her blade up beneath his ribs. The air filled with the stench of iron and pine sap. Then Orwyn flung a handful of powder into the fire pit. It flared green and white, hissing like a dragon's breath. The painted men screamed, clutching their eyes. "Now!" Brynja cried. They ran. Through the trees, over roots slick with ice, down a narrow path that wound between frozen rocks. The forest seemed to shift around them, branches bending inward, the wind whispering words none of them understood. At last, they burst into a clearing where a narrow stream ran black beneath the snow. Davos fell to one knee, gasping. His sword was red, his hands trembled. Brynja crouched beside him, scanning the shadows. "They'll follow. They always follow," Orwin leaned against a tree, his breath wheezing. "We need shelter," he said. "Somewhere hidden. I've heard tell of caves along the northern cliffs, old smugglers' dens from before the kings outlawed trade here." Davos nodded. "Lead the way." They followed the stream as it wound northward. The sky darkened, and the wind carried the far-off cry of something vast, neither man nor beast. Brynja kept her hand on her knife. After some hours, they found it. A narrow cleft in the stone, half hidden by a tumble of snow. Inside, the air was dry and still. The ceiling hung with long teeth of ice. Davos struck flint to spark, and soon a small fire danced between them. Only then did they dare to speak of what they'd seen. "They called her chosen," Davos said, staring into the flames, "and they spoke of a lord beneath the mountain." Brynja's eyes were distant. "There's an old tale," she said slowly. "The Skagosi tell it by their fires when the storms come. Long ago, before the Andals, before even the first men, a king ruled here who learned the language of the earth. He could call fire from stone and shape it with his hands, but he tried to make himself a god, and the mountains swallowed him whole. They say his heart still beats in the dark, waiting to rise again when fed by the blood of kings." Orwin gave a soft, nervous laugh. "And you think that's who they serve? A buried king from some children's tale?" Brynja met his gaze. "Tell me you haven't seen stranger things, Meister." He said nothing. Davos rubbed a hand across his face. "If Shireen is alive, they mean to use her for this ritual. We'll need to reach her before that happens. Do you know where this mountain lies?" Brynja hesitated. "East of here, beyond the forests and the Black Lake. Few return from there." "Then we'll make sure we do." That night, Davos dreamed of fire. He saw Shireen standing upon a mountain of ash, her pale face streaked with tears, her gray-scale skin glinting like stone. Behind her loomed a shape too vast to see clearly, but its eyes burned red as coals. When he reached for her, she whispered his name, "Ser Davos, save him before they make him kill us all." He woke drenched in sweat, the fire guttering low. Brynja was already awake, listening. From outside came the faintest echo, a low rhythmic sound like drums. "They're hunting again," she murmured. By dawn, they were moving. The storm had passed, leaving the world in eerie silence. The forest opened into a wide plain of ice that stretched toward dark hills on the horizon. Above them rose the mountain, a jagged black peak, wreathed in mist. It looked alive. They crossed the plain quickly, though the snow sometimes hid crevices deep enough to swallow a man whole. Once, they passed a frozen carcass half buried in frost. A dire wolf, enormous even in death, its eyes pecked out by ravens. As they neared the mountain, they came upon an ancient stone bridge spanning a gorge. At its center stood a small figure cloaked in gray. Davos slowed, his heart pounding. "Shireen," he called. The figure turned. For a heartbeat, he saw her face, the child he had taught to read, her smile soft as summer. Then the vision flickered, and what stood before them was something else entirely. The girl's eyes were black as pitch. Her skin gleamed with veins of gray stone. She spoke with a voice not her own. "He waits below," she said. "He remembers your name, Onion Knight." The ground shook beneath their feet. The bridge cracked, stones falling away into the chasm. Brynja seized Davos's arm. "Run!" They sprinted for the far side as the bridge gave way behind them. The roar of falling stone filled the air. Davos leapt the last few feet, landing hard on the icy ground. He turned back just in time to see the figure vanish into the mist. When the echoes faded, only silence remained. Orwin clutched the wall for balance. By the 7. What was that? Something wearing her face, Brynja said. We're close now. Too close. Davos looked toward the peak. Clouds gathered there, swirling like a great eye. In the center, lightning flashed red. We keep going, he said quietly, until we find her, or what's left of her. They pressed on through narrow passes and tunnels that smelled of stone and blood. Strange carvings marked the walls, spirals, eyes, and runes like those on Melisandre's fires. At last they reached a vast cavern lit by a dull crimson glow. In its heart stood a great slab of obsidian shaped like an altar. Upon it lay a body wrapped in furs and chains. Davos stepped closer and felt his breath catch. It was not Shireen. It was a man. His skin was pale as frost, his chest unmoving, but his heart glimmered faintly beneath the skin, pulsing with a red light that was not life. Orwin stared, transfixed. The Lord beneath the mountain, he whispered. He's not dead. He's waiting. Brynja drew her knife. Then let's make sure he never wakes. But as she raised the blade, the air trembled. A deep, hollow voice echoed through the cavern. You would kill what you do not understand, child of the snows? The man's eyes opened, burning like embers in the dark. And Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, realized that the demon lord of Skagos was not what the tales had promised. The glow from the demon lord's heart filled the cavern like the last light of sunset, casting long shadows across the walls of black stone. Davos's sword felt heavy in his hand. His breath misted in the chill air. The man, if he was a man, lay bound to the slab, his body carved with strange runes that seemed to shimmer when he moved. Brynja held her dagger poised above his chest. Speak, she demanded. What are you? The eyes of the figure, red as dying coals, shifted toward her. Once, he said, his voice slow and deep, like stones grinding beneath the sea, I was called a king, before your kind forgot my name. Orwin took an uncertain step forward. A king of Skagos? The man's lips curved faintly. A king of flame, of earth, of the blood that moves beneath stone. His gaze slid toward Davos, piercing and strange. You carry the smell of the sea, salt and smoke. You have seen the fire woman's work. Davos felt a chill creep down his spine. Melisandre, he murmured. The man nodded once. Yes, the Red Priestess. She is of my making, though she knows it not. She touched the flame that was mine before the world took shape. Brynja lowered her blade slightly. If you are so mighty, why are you chained? The man's laugh echoed softly through the cavern. Because men feared what they could not rule. They built temples in my name, then cursed me when I would not bend to their prayers. So they bound me here, by blood, by stone, by betrayal. My strength sleeps until awakened by royal blood. Davos stiffened. Shireen. The man's eyes gleamed brighter. Yes, the girl. She was brought to me by those who still remember the old words. They think to free me fully, to use me against the Iron Throne. But they are fools. The blood of kings burns hotter than they know. It will destroy them before it serves them. Brynja's fingers tightened on her hilt. Where is she? Below, the man said, in the hollow beneath the mountain's heart. She is afraid, but she still lives. Orwin, trembling, leaned closer. If you wish not to be freed by them, why tell us? Why warn us? The red eyes dimmed. Because I have seen your wars, your kings, your endless bloodshed. The world of men drowns in its own greed. But this girl, she is different. There is something in her that remembers kindness. I would not see her wasted for the sake of zealots. Davos sheathed his sword slowly. Then help us find her. The man smiled again, sadly this time. "Break my chains and I will show you the way." Brynja stepped back at once. "No, this reeks of sorcery. We free him and the island burns." Davos met her gaze. "And if we don't, Shireen dies." The wildling's expression hardened. "You don't understand, Onion Knight. There are worse things than death. That thing is one of them." Orwyn moved to the slab, running a hand over the runes. "These are old Valyrian. No, older still. They bind through blood and fire. If he lies, the breaking of them could unmake half this mountain." "Then be careful," Davos said. Brynja swore under her breath but did not stop him. The maester drew a small blade and pricked his finger, letting a drop of blood fall upon the nearest rune. The symbol hissed and flared, its glow fading. One by one, the bindings broke. The cavern trembled with each release, dust falling from the ceiling. When the last rune dimmed, silence fell so heavy it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Then the demon lord sat up. The chains fell from him like water. His movements were slow but certain, his form too human to be monstrous. Yet something about him made the air thrum with power. He looked around as if tasting freedom for the first time in centuries. "My thanks," he said, his tone neither kind nor cruel. "Now, come. The girl waits below, and the others prepare the blood fire." He led them through a narrow passage that wound deeper into the earth. The walls shimmered faintly, veins of red light pulsing beneath the stone, as though the mountain itself lived and breathed. Brynja walked beside Davos, every muscle tense. "If he turns on us, then we finish what we started," Davos said. They descended into a vast hollow chamber where an underground lake stretched black and still. At its center stood a small island of rock. Torches burned along its edge, casting reflections that danced like fire upon the water. And there, bound upon a pillar of stone, was Shireen. Her eyes were wide with terror, her lips chapped from cold. Around her stood a dozen of the red-painted zealots, chanting in tongues older than Westeros itself. One of them, a tall man crowned with horns, lifted a dagger carved of obsidian. "Blood for the Lord," he cried. "Blood to wake the fire." Davos surged forward, sword drawn. "No!" But before he could reach the water's edge, the demon lord raised his hand. The lake rippled, and a bridge of stone rose from its depths, carrying them toward the island. The zealots turned in shock. The horn-crowned man's eyes widened. "My lord, you are awake." "Yes," said the demon lord, stepping onto the rock. His voice rolled through the cavern like thunder. "Awake and displeased." The zealots fell to their knees. "We have served you." "You have served your own hunger," he interrupted. "You would spill a child's blood to command what should never be yours." The dagger-bearer trembled. "We only wish to free you." The demon lord lifted his hand again, and the man's body ignited without flame, turning to ash in the blink of an eye. "Freedom is not given," he said softly. "It is taken." The others fled, their cries echoing down the tunnels. Davos rushed to Shireen, cutting her bonds. She fell into his arms, sobbing. "Sir Davos, I thought you were gone. I thought—" "Hush now, lass. You're safe," he whispered, though his heart was far from certain. The demon lord watched them in silence. The light in his chest flickered dimly. Brynja approached him warily. "What will you do now?" He looked toward the ceiling of the cavern, as though seeing through stone and sky. "Once I sought to rule. Now I see the folly in it. The world does not need another king." His gaze returned to Davos. "It needs men who remember mercy." Then the light in his chest brightened. burning white, then gold. The air grew warm. The water began to steam. "Wait," Davos called. "What are you?" "Ending this," the demon lord said. "Let the mountain sleep." A roar filled the cavern as the walls began to shake. Steam exploded upward, rocks crashing into the lake. Brynja seized Shireen's hand, dragging her toward the bridge. Davos turned to follow, but for a heartbeat he looked back and saw the demon lord sink slowly into the glowing water, his body dissolving into light. When they reached the mouth of the cave, the mountain behind them groaned like a dying beast. The ground split, smoke rising in pillars as fire poured from the cracks. They did not stop running until the roar faded and the air turned cold once more. At last, they stood upon the frozen plain, the peak of Skagos now half shattered, a column of smoke twisting into the gray sky. Shireen clung to Davos's arm, trembling. "He wasn't evil," she whispered. "He was lonely." Davos looked at the distant mountain, its fires dimming. "Aye," he said softly. "And in the end, he saved us all." The wind rose again, carrying the scent of sea and ash. And though Davos did not speak of it, he knew the demon lord's words would follow him for the rest of his days. The world needs men who remember mercy. They did not look back for a long while. The sea wind swept across the barren plain, carrying with it the faint smell of sulfur and smoke from the mountain that had once been called the Demon's Throne. The snow fell in soft, unbroken sheets, masking the blackened scars where molten fire had touched the earth. Only when the roar of the collapsing caverns faded entirely did Davos at last allow himself to slow his steps. Shireen was half asleep in his arms, worn from terror and hunger, her small body light as a bundle of reeds. Brynja led the way, her bow slung across her back, eyes scanning the horizon for signs of life or pursuit. Orwyn, limping and coughing, muttered to himself in half-formed prayers and old Valyrian fragments, as though the words alone might keep his courage from breaking. By mid-morning, they reached the edge of a ravine where an ancient pine jutted from the rock, its trunk twisted by wind. They took shelter beneath it, huddling close as Davos built a meager fire from fallen branches. The warmth was small but steady, the kind of comfort that keeps men sane when the world seems made only of cold and death. Shireen stirred at last, her voice weak. "Is it over?" Davos brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Aye, princess. The mountain sleeps again." Her eyes, wide and gray as the northern sky, lingered on him. "He wasn't wicked, Sir Davos. He said he wanted to help." He hesitated. "Aye. I reckon he did." Brynja leaned forward, frowning. "Help? That creature was born of fire and shadow. If he wished mercy, it was only because he'd grown tired of torment. Or because he'd remembered he was once a man," Davos said quietly. The wildling woman said nothing. When the storm eased, they moved again, down through narrow valleys and over frozen streams. The landscape grew stranger as they went, broken stones shaped like faces, trees that seemed to bleed sap as red as wine. Skagos was a land that never forgot its dead. By dusk, they reached the coast, where the wreck of an old ship lay half buried in the ice. The timbers were blackened by time, but the hull still stood, its name faintly visible, the Maid of Sisterton. Orwyn smiled weakly. "The Seven favor us at last. Perhaps she can still float." It took hours to clear the snow and patch what could be mended. The old maester found tar in a sealed barrel, and Davos used it to seal the worst of the cracks. By dawn, the tide had risen enough to lift the ship free. As they pushed her into the surf, Shireen stood upon the shore, clutching her cloak tight. The wind whipped her hair across her scarred cheek. "Will we go home now?" Davos paused. The word home struck deeper than he expected. Stannis was gone. The Baratheon banners burned. The world once again in the hands of men who called themselves kings. He knelt before her. "We'll go where we're needed, lass. But first, we must reach the wall. The men there will see you safe." She nodded bravely, though he saw the fear in her eyes. Brynja joined them, her bow slung across her shoulder. "Once we reach Eastwatch, my debt to you ends, smuggler. After that, I go back to my people." Davos looked at her with quiet respect. "Then you've more honor than most lords I've known." As they sailed east along the jagged coast, the island of Skagos faded behind them. Smoke still drifted from the mountain's broken peak, like the breath of a dying god. But the sea was calm, the wind steady, and for the first time in many moons, Davos dared to believe they might see the dawn without blood. Yet peace is never long-lived in the north. On the third night, a storm rose, swift and sudden. The waves swelled high as walls, hurling the ship against the wind. Lightning split the sky, and the sea glowed green beneath the clouds. Davos fought the tiller with all his strength, shouting orders that vanished into the wind. "Hold fast, girl," he called as Shireen clung to the mast. Then came the sound of wood splintering. A hole had opened along the hull. Orwyn tried to plug it, but the sea poured through, cold and merciless. "We're taking water," the maester cried. Brynja lashed herself to the railing. "There's land ahead. I see rocks." Davos peered through the rain and saw dark shapes rising from the surf. Not cliffs, but wrecks, a graveyard of ships. The current pulled them toward it. "By the Seven," Davos muttered. The Skagosi weren't lying about the drowned bay. The ship struck once, twice, then shattered against the rocks. He woke hours later upon a stretch of sand, half buried in kelp and snow. The storm had passed, leaving the sea eerily calm. Brynja sat nearby, wrapping a torn strip of cloth around her arm. Orwyn lay motionless beside a piece of driftwood, his face pale. "Maester?" Davos knelt, shaking him gently. No breath came. The man's eyes stared up at the gray sky, lifeless but strangely peaceful. Brynja lowered her head. "He died keeping the girl afloat. I saw it." Davos's heart clenched. "Where is she?" Brynja pointed down the beach. Shireen sat upon a rock, her cloak soaked through, her small hands clutching something close to her chest. When Davos approached, he saw what it was, a shard of black stone, polished smooth like glass. It pulsed faintly with red light. "He gave it to me before he sank," she whispered. "Said it would protect me." Davos stared. It looked like a piece of the Demon Lord's altar. He remembered how it had glowed when the mountain collapsed. "Throw it away," he said sharply. "That thing's cursed." Shireen shook her head, clutching it tighter. "He said it's not evil. He said it remembers." Brynja spat into the sand. "Remembering doesn't make it safe." But when Davos reached to take it, the stone grew warm in his hand. For an instant, he saw a vision. Fire beneath water, a face of flame fading into peace. Then it was gone. He looked at Shireen again, his voice softer. "Keep it then, but guard it well. Some memories are better hidden from the world." They buried Orwyn that evening beneath a cairn of stone, his maester's chain laid upon the top. Shireen said a prayer she half remembered from her mother's lessons, and Brynja stood silent, her face unreadable. That night, as the stars came out, Davos thought he saw a faint glow upon the horizon, where the mountain once stood. It flickered like a beacon, then faded into the dark. "Rest easy," he murmured to the wind. Your mercy wasn't wasted. The days that followed were hard, but they made steady progress east along the coast, scavenging what food they could find. Shireen grew stronger, her spirit unbroken, and Brynja spoke more often. Stories of the far north, of mammoths and shadow cats, of the hidden gods who dwell beneath ice and snow. At last, after what felt like an age, they saw the black line of the wall rising against the horizon, tall as mountains and white as bone. Eastwatch's beacon fire still burned. As they approached the gates, the Night's Watchman took them in, giving them food and dry cloaks. Davos wrote his message to the Lord Commander that very night, explaining what he could, leaving out what he dared not. When Shireen slept, Brynja asked quietly, "What will you tell them of Skagos?" "The truth," Davos said. Then he hesitated. "Or as much of it as men will believe." Brynja smirked faintly. "Then they'll think you mad." "Let them," he replied. Madmen sometimes tell the truest tales. Outside, the wind howled against the wall, a sound both fierce and mournful. And somewhere beyond the frozen sea, in the ashes of a shattered mountain, something old and weary slept once more, its dreams full of fire and mercy both. The night was long, but dawn was coming. The days passed slowly at Eastwatch by the sea. The wind howled endlessly from the shivering sea, rattling the shutters and turning breath to frost in the air. Ships no longer came to harbor, for the waters beyond were filled with drift ice and ghost stories, and few dared to sail north of Hardhome. Davos Seaworth stood upon the ramparts, watching the gray horizon, the smell of salt and pine mixed with the faint smoke of the garrison's fires. Below him, men of the watch moved like shadows, silent, weary, but dutiful. Even at the world's edge, duty never slept. Shireen was safe for now. She spent her days in the keep's library with Meister Garmin, learning her letters anew and tracing maps of the realm with trembling hands. She was thinner than she had been, paler too, but her eyes still carried that spark of stubborn hope. The wildling woman Brynja had chosen to remain as well, saying she'd seen enough of the free folks' wars and had no taste for bowing to any lord. Davos did not know what to make of her. She spoke little, laughed less, but her gaze missed nothing. He'd seen the way she watched the horizon, as if expecting something or someone to rise from the sea. That morning, as snow drifted against the walls, Brynja joined him on the battlements. She wore the black furs of the watch now, though no vows bound her. "She's a brave girl," she said, nodding toward the courtyard below where Shireen was feeding the ravens. "Too brave for this cruel world." "Aye," Davos replied. "Bravery runs in her blood, though it's brought her naught but grief." Brynja glanced at him sidelong. "And you? Will you stay and play at the crow's game, or sail south to lick your wounds?" Davos gave a humorless smile. "The sea and I have unfinished business, but winter's no time for sailing. I'll stay until she's safe in good hands. After that, the gods can do with me as they please." She grunted in approval. "You've the look of a man who's made peace with ghosts." "Peace?" He shook his head. "No, just learn to live with them." A horn sounded from the gatehouse. 2 long blasts, 1 short, an approach from the south. Davos squinted into the snow. Through the haze, a small band of riders appeared, black cloaks flapping like wings. The gate was opened, and they entered. 6 men of the watch, and among them a Lord Davos recognized at once. "Jon Snow," Brynja murmured. The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch dismounted, his face drawn but resolute. His dark hair was dusted with frost, and his sword, Longclaw, hung at his hip. Davos descended to meet him. "My lord," Davos greeted. "The wall stands as tall as ever, I see." Jon's smile was faint. "And colder than ever, Sir Davos. I had word from Meister Garmin, a girl with royal blood come from the sea. I thought it a tale at first." "She lives," Davos said. "By luck or by grace, I can't say. But she's Stannis' daughter, and the last of his line." Jon's gaze softened. "I remember her father. A hard man, but a just one in his way. The North owes him much, though few will admit it. Then let his daughter find kindness here, at least," Davos said. "She shall." Jon replied simply. Later that night, they sat together by the fire in the great hall, the storm raging outside. Shireen slept nearby, her head upon a stack of furs. Brynja kept to the shadows, sharpening her blade with slow, measured strokes. Davos told Jon of Skagos, of the zealots, the mountain, and the being they had called the Demon Lord. He spoke of the fire, the chains, and the end that had shaken the island itself. Jon listened in silence, his expression grave. When Davos finished, Jon leaned back, the firelight flickering across his face. "If what you say is true, then something old stirred there, older than the Red Priests or their flames, and you think it's truly gone?" Davos nodded slowly. "He gave his life to seal it again. I saw it with my own eyes. The mountain sleeps." Jon's voice was low. "For how long, I wonder?" Brynja looked up then. "As long as men remember mercy. That's what he said." Jon studied her. "You believe that?" "I don't know what I believe," she said. "But I saw him burn the zealots who worshipped him. That was no god's wrath. It was a man's sorrow." The hall fell silent. The storm howled against the walls like a living thing. At last, Jon spoke again. "The world beyond the wall grows darker by the day. The dead are marching. The winds carry their scent. If this demon lord was truly a creature of fire, perhaps his end has weakened what little warmth held them back." Davos frowned. "You mean to say he kept the dead at bay?" "Perhaps," Jon said softly. "Or perhaps he was part of the same balance that's breaking now." The thought sat heavy in Davos's chest. He remembered the heat of the cavern, the red light in that ancient man's eyes, the words that had burned themselves into his soul. The world needs men who remember mercy. The next day, the wind shifted. The ravens grew restless. A message arrived from Castle Black. White walkers sighted beyond the frost fangs, moving south. Preparations began at once. Jon sent riders to Hardhome and beyond, summoning every man willing to fight. Eastwatch became a fortress of noise and iron. Davos helped where he could, though he felt the weight of years pressing on him. Brynja drilled the younger watchmen, teaching them to move silently, to strike fast. Shireen spent her hours copying maps and writing letters for the Meister, her small hands stained with ink. Then one night, as the moon hung pale above the sea, Davos found her sitting by the window, the shard of black stone clutched in her palm. It still glowed faintly, a heartbeat of red. "He speaks to me sometimes," she whispered. Davos froze. "Who does?" "The man from the mountain," she said. "In dreams. He says the fire isn't gone. It sleeps, like him. He says it will wake again when mercy is forgotten." Davos knelt beside her. "Dreams aren't always true, lass." "I know," she said, "but it feels true." He did not take the stone from her this time. He simply closed her fingers around it and kissed her brow. "Then we'll make sure the world remembers mercy a little longer." Outside, the wind carried a distant sound, a crack like thunder, rolling from far beyond the sea. The guards upon the wall would later say they saw a brief glow in the north, like fire beneath the ice. Jon Snow stood upon the ramparts, watching that light fade, his hand upon the pommel of his sword. "Fire in the land of the dead," he murmured. "Let us hope it's not an omen." But in the shadows below, Brynja whispered something only the wind could hear. "It's not an omen," she said. "It's a promise." And far away beneath the frozen earth of Skagos, deep where no man had walked in an age, a single ember glowed faintly in the dark, waiting, remembering. The winter deepened, and Eastwatch became a fortress of snow and silence. The sea froze in great sheets, the waves locked mid-motion, glittering like glass in the dim sunlight. The men of the night's watch wrapped themselves in every scrap of fur they could find, and still the cold crept through their bones. Davos Seaworth rose before dawn each day, the habits of old seafaring life still ruling him. He would climb the ramparts and look east, where the horizon vanished into mist and ice. The shivering sea was a graveyard now, but the smuggler's heart in him still stirred when he saw the pale light over the water. Sometimes he imagined he saw movement there, dark shapes beneath the frozen surface, as though something swam in the depths below the ice. The sailors' tales said monsters prowled those waters, but Davos had seen stranger things than sea beasts. He'd seen fire take the shape of men. He'd seen kings burned alive for faith. He'd seen a child with half a face of stone speak the words of an ancient god, and he remembered, always, the mountain's last light as it fell into the sea. The days stretched thin, marked by small labors and smaller hopes. Shireen spent her mornings with Meister Garmin, learning the lore of the old kings and copying letters to send south to Winterfell and White Harbor. Her cheeks had regained a trace of color, though the cold bit through her skin like knives. The men had come to call her the little princess of the wall, and when she smiled, even the hardest of them softened. Brynja kept to the training yard, drilling recruits with her long knife and bow. She spoke little, yet every man knew better than to challenge her skill. They said she had once hunted whites beyond the Frostfangs and lived to tell the tale. When Davos asked if it was true, she only shrugged. Dead men are slower than they look. Jon Snow, Lord Commander, came and went with the riders of the Watch, rallying the wildling clans, fortifying the castles along the wall. He carried the weight of the realm on his shoulders, and though he was young, his eyes had the weariness of a man thrice his years. One night, as the wind howled through the watchtower, Davos found him staring into the fire in the command hall. "You've fought for kings before," Jon said quietly when Davos entered. "What drives a man like you to serve, after all you've seen?" Davos gave a tired smile. "Once I thought it was duty. Then I thought it was faith. But I've come to think it's neither. It's just trying to keep one good thing alive in a world that wants to burn it all down." Jon nodded slowly. I know that feeling well." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire. Then Jon said, "I received word from Castle Black this morning. There are whispers. Wildlings speak of fire rising again from Skagos. Red light in the sky, smoke on the sea." Davos's stomach turned. That mountain was ash. Nothing could have lived. Nothing living, perhaps, Jon said. But the old powers sleep lightly. The dead stir, and even fire cannot rest forever. Before Davos could reply, a shout echoed from the courtyard below. "Riders! From the west!" They hurried outside. The gates opened to admit a half-frozen band of scouts, their horses staggering with exhaustion. Their leader, a grim-faced ranger with frost-bitten fingers, dismounted and knelt before Jon. "We rode from the Frostfangs," he gasped. "The dead move faster than before. Whole villages gone. But there's more. Strange fire in the sky, blue and red both, burning without heat. And a voice, my lord. a voice calling across the wind. Jon's expression darkened. What voice? The ranger shuddered. It said a name. Yours. That night, no one slept easily. The cold grew sharper, the wind rising to a shriek. The next morning, the sea's edge steamed as though fire smoldered beneath the ice. Shireen stood beside Davos on the ramparts, her hood drawn up. The shard of black stone, the one she had carried from Skagos, hung from a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her cloak. But he could feel its warmth even through the cloth, a faint pulse against the cold. "Do you see it?" she whispered. Davos followed her gaze. Far to the east, just visible through the haze, a pillar of smoke rose from the horizon. It glowed faintly red, the color of dying embers. "The mountain," he said softly. Brynja joined them, her face pale beneath her furs. "You said he died." "I saw him die," Davos said. "But maybe gods don't stay dead." The days that followed blurred together. Messages from the north, more sightings of strange lights beyond the sea. The watch prepared for siege, though none could say what they waited for. Then, one evening, as the sun sank red behind the wall, Shireen cried out from the courtyard. Davos ran to her side. The shard at her neck burned with light, casting crimson across the snow. She fell to her knees, gasping, as the air shimmered around her. "Shireen!" Davos shouted, catching her shoulders. "What's happening?" Her eyes opened wide, and they were no longer the eyes of a child. They burned with faint gold, like candlelight behind water. "He comes," she said, her voice strange and hollow. "The mountain wakes. The fire remembers. Mercy is fading." Then the light died, and she collapsed against him. When she woke hours later, she remembered nothing. Jon called a council that night. In the great hall, with the storm raging outside, the commanders of the watch gathered. Black cloaks, pale faces, eyes rimmed red with sleeplessness. "This is no common omen," said Maester Garmin. "Fire that burns cold, mountains that rise again. The old powers stir, my lords. We may be caught between ice and flame." "Between the dead and the living," Brynja muttered. "And neither side cares for us." Jon turned to Davos. "You've seen this fire before. If it comes again, can it be stopped?" Davos stared into the hearth, watching the embers shift and crack. "He said the world needs men who remember mercy. Maybe that's the key. Maybe the fire only rises when we forget what kindness is." Jon frowned. "Kindness will not stop the dead." "No," Davos agreed. "But neither will fear." Outside, a horn sounded once, long and low. The men froze. The watchers on the wall cried out, and Jon rushed to the ramparts. Across the sea of frozen waves, something vast moved beneath the ice. Shapes like shadows glided just below the surface, circling the coast. Then the ice split, cracking open with a thunderous roar. Flames erupted skyward, red and gold twisting into the clouds, and from within the fire came a figure of light, a man's shape, tall and terrible, his eyes two burning stars. His voice rolled across the wind, deep as thunder. "Mercy is forgotten," it said. "The fire must remind." The men of the watch fell to their knees in terror. Brynja drew her bow. Jon gripped Longclaw tight, but Davos stood unmoving, the wind tearing at his cloak. "He saved us once," he whispered. "He wouldn't destroy us now." Yet even as he spoke, the flames surged higher, and the ice began to melt. The sea was waking, and the demon lord, it seemed, was no longer content to sleep. The fire upon the sea burned without smoke. It glowed red and gold against the endless white of the ice, like the heart of the world laid bare. The men upon the wall could only stare, their faces pale beneath the torchlight. Even the wind had fallen silent, Jon Snow stood at the highest parapet, Longclaw drawn but useless. The sword's pale edge gleamed like frost, its bare's head pommel catching the light of the flames. He felt as though the air itself pressed down on him, heavy with the weight of old, forgotten things. Below, Davos Seaworth gripped the ramparts until his knuckles went white. Brynja stood beside him, an arrow notched though her hands shook. Between them, Shireen gazed out at the horizon, her small face calm in the unnatural glow. "It's him," she whispered. "The man from the mountain. He's calling me." "No," Davos said sharply. "He's gone. You saw him die." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the fire across the water. "He said mercy was fading. He said he would return when men forgot. I think he means to keep his word." A sound like thunder echoed from the sea. The ice cracked again, great fissures spreading outward in jagged lines. Steam rose in pillars. And then, rising from the heart of the fire, a shape began to form. At first, it was no more than a shadow. Then the flames drew around it, shaping limbs, a face, the outline of armor that glowed as though forged from molten stone. The demon lord of Skagos had risen again, his eyes twin embers burning across the frozen waste. Yet his face was not one of wrath. It was sorrow that marked him, deep and ancient, like a god who had seen the end of all things. The men of the watch broke into cries of fear and prayer. Some ran for the gates, others fell to their knees, muttering the Seven's names. But Jon did not move. He sheathed his sword and stepped forward, his voice carrying over the wind. "If you mean harm to us, you'll find none here who can stand against you. But if there's reason in you, speak it." The figure's reply was a sound that shook the air. When he spoke, his words came like the rolling of waves against stone. "The dead rise in the north. Their chill spreads. The fire must balance the ice, or the world will break." Jon frowned. "You would burn the realm to save it?" "The fire cleanses. The ice devours," said the demon lord. "The choice is not mine. It never was." Davos found his voice. "You said you wanted mercy. You gave your life to save that girl, to stop this." The burning eyes turned toward him. "Mercy was your gift, Seaworth. I took it for a time, but the world forgets. Men forget. And when they do, the old pacts stir again." Shireen clutched the black shard that hung around her neck. Its glow pulsed faster, matching the beat of the great creature's heart. "He's bound to the fire," she whispered. "He can't stop it now. He needs someone to hold it back." Brynja cursed under her breath. "You mean he needs to burn something else instead?" "No," Shireen said. "He needs someone to forgive him." The air grew hotter, the flames reaching higher. The ice around the wall began to hiss, melting into rivers that ran red in the light. Jon barked orders, sending men to the battlements to ready ropes and water. But the sea burned too fiercely. Davos turned to Shireen, desperate. "How, lass? How do you forgive a god?" "You don't," she said simply. "You remind him what he was before he became one." Before Davos could stop her, she stepped forward. Her cloak whipped behind her, her small figure outlined against the blazing sea. "Shireen!" he cried, but she did not turn. The fire brightened, and the ice between her and the horizon cracked open, forming a narrow bridge of stone. The same black rock that had filled the caves of Skagos rose now from the sea, as if answering her call. She walked across it, her footsteps sure, the shard around her neck glowing brighter with each step. Brynja started to follow, but Davos caught her arm. "No, if this is truly her path, we can't stop it." The wildling woman stared at him, anger and grief battling in her eyes. "You mean to let a child walk into that?" "She's more than a child," Davos said softly, "and she's braver than all of us." The bridge shuddered beneath Shireen's feet as she neared the heart of the fire. The demon lord watched her approach, his expression unreadable. When she stood before him, she raised her chin and met his burning gaze. "You said mercy would save the world," she said. "So remember it." The great figure's flame flickered. His voice, when it came, was quieter. "Child of kings, what would you have me do?" "Rest," she said. "You've burned long enough." Then she lifted the shard from her neck. The glow that had pulsed within it spread outward, wrapping her in light. The sea roared, the fire bent inward, and for an instant, Davos saw both of them, man and child, wreathed in a single blaze of gold and crimson. The ground shook. The wall itself groaned as waves of heat rolled across the world. The fire collapsed inward upon itself, devouring its own heart, until only smoke and steam remained. When the light faded, the ice settled once more. The sea was black again, calm and silent. The bridge had vanished. Davos ran to the edge of the wall, shouting her name until his voice broke. But there was nothing. No flame, no sound, no sign of life. Jon laid a hand upon his shoulder. "She's gone, Sir Davos." Davos sank to his knees. "Aye," he said hoarsely, "gone like her father, like all the good ones." Brynja turned away, her face hard with grief. The men below began to murmur prayers, unsure whether they had witnessed a miracle or a curse. But that night, as the moon rose over the frozen sea, a strange light shimmered beneath the ice. It was faint, like the glow of embers buried deep below. And when the dawn came, melting the frost upon the ramparts, Davos saw something caught in the cracks of the ice. A small piece of black stone, polished smooth as glass. He picked it up. It was warm to the touch, the same warmth as a child's hand. He closed his fingers around it and looked out toward the silent sea. "Rest easy, lass," he murmured. "The world remembers." Far to the east, the last smoke from Skagos drifted into the clouds. The sea lay still again, and the fires were gone. But in the heart of every man who had seen that light, something had changed. They spoke little of what had happened. The masters would call it a storm of fire upon the waves, a trick of light and air. But the men who stood on the wall that night knew better. They had seen mercy made flesh. And though the long winter still crept southward, though the dead gathered beyond the frost and darkness covered the land, there was a warmth that did not fade, a promise that even the coldest nights could not extinguish. For in the far north, in the place where fire met ice, a girl's light had shone once, and the world would never forget it. The days that followed the fire upon the sea were filled with silence. No man spoke of what had happened, though every one of them had seen it. The fire that had burned without smoke, the girl who had walked across the water, the light that swallowed her and left the world trembling in its wake. Such things were not meant to be remembered by mortal tongues. Yet memory has a way of clinging like frost to stone. At Eastwatch by the sea, men spoke softly of omens. They said the sea had been blessed or cursed. Some said the fire had been a god's wrath quenched by innocence. Others whispered that a child had struck a bargain with the old powers of the world, and that her light would return in the hour of greatest need. Davos Seaworth said nothing. He kept the shard of black stone wrapped in a strip of cloth and carried it always in his pocket, close to his heart. It no longer glowed, yet it was never cold. He could not bear to part with it. for it was all that remained of her. The days grew darker. Snow fell in ceaseless sheets, piling high against the gates. Word came from Castle Black that the dead had been seen again beyond the frost fangs, an army of pale shadows moving under a sky that burned blue with cold fire. Jon Snow rode often between the castles, his men dwindling with each journey. He had become the quiet heart of the watch, calm, stern, and colder than the ice beneath his feet. Yet his eyes still held that old fire, the spark that spoke of purpose. Brynja remained as well, though she kept to herself, hunting in the forests south of the wall. She brought back venison, fish, and stories from the wildlings she met in secret. "They're frightened," she told Davos one night as they sat by the hearth. "The sky burns in the north. The snow falls black in places. They think the world's ending." Davos stirred the embers with a poker. "Maybe it is." She looked at him sharply. "You've given up, then?" He shook his head. "Not given up, just tired. I've spent my life fighting for kings and causes that never lasted. Stannis, Robert, even the gods. And every time it's the same. The good burn with the wicked, and what's left is ash." Brynja's expression softened. "And the girl? Would she want you to think that?" Davos stared into the fire. The memory of Shireen's voice came to him, soft as the sound of waves on the shore. He said mercy would save the world. "No," he admitted. "She wouldn't." A horn sounded from the watchtower. One short blast, then another. A messenger had arrived from the south. They found the rider half frozen, his horse near death. He was a young man from the Nightfort garrison, his lips blue with cold. "A ship," he gasped, "off the coast. A ship with black sails, no flag." Jon ordered a detachment of men to ride with him to the shore. Davos went too. The sea lay calm beneath a slate-gray sky, and sure enough, a single vessel drifted just beyond the ice floes. Her hull was blackened, her masts splintered, but she floated still. The name painted upon her stern made Davos's blood run cold. The Black Betha. "She was lost years ago," he murmured. "Sank off Skagos when the storm took her." Brynja frowned. "Then how in the seven hells is she here?" Jon gave the order to send out boats. The sea was treacherous, the ice cracking beneath their oars, but they reached her by dusk. The deck was empty, save for ropes and frost. The sails hung in tatters. Davos moved among the wreckage, his heart pounding. He knew every plank, every nail. This ship had been his home once, his pride. He found his old cabin below deck, its door half off its hinges. Inside, the smell of damp wood and salt filled the air. Something lay upon the table, a bundle of oilskin, bound with twine. He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a logbook, its pages stiff with cold. The last entry was written in his own hand. He stared at it in disbelief. The ink was fresh. "The fire sleeps. Mercy binds it still, but the sea remembers." The candle beside him guttered, its flame shivering in the draft. Brynja stepped into the cabin behind him. "What is it?" He handed her the page. "It's mine, my handwriting, but I never wrote this." The wildling woman glanced at the words, then crossed herself in the old way. "This ship came from nowhere. Maybe she carries a message. A warning, more like." Davos said grimly, "Whatever mercy Shireen bought us, it's fading." That night, the storm returned. They barely made it back to shore before the sea swallowed the Black Betha once more. By dawn, she was gone, as if she'd never been. Jon summoned his captains in the keep's hall. "We cannot wait for the dead to come to us," he said. "We'll ride north to meet them. If the fire rises again, let it burn against the darkness, not behind it." Davos stood among the men but said nothing. His hand rested upon the shard in his pocket, and for the first time in weeks, he felt it grow warm. When the host of the watch rode north, Davos went with them. The snow swallowed sound, the wind biting through mail and leather alike. Brynja led the scouts ahead, her white hair blending with the frost. They passed through the haunted forests where ancient faces watched from the trees. Beyond lay the foothills of the Frostfangs, stark and lifeless. On the second night, the fires burned blue. The dead came with the dawn. They moved like smoke, silent and endless, their eyes cold as stars. The first charge broke against them like waves against stone. Jon's men fought bravely, but for every corpse they felled, 2 more rose in its place. Davos fought beside Brynja, his sword clumsy in his old hands, his breath fogging in the cold. "Fall back," Jon shouted. "To the ridge!" They climbed toward higher ground, the dead close behind. Then the earth shook beneath their feet. A fissure split the valley floor, light seeping from below. Red light, hot and blinding. Brynja turned to Davos, her eyes wide. "The fire!" It burst upward in a pillar, consuming the dead in a wall of flame. The air filled with the hiss of melting snow, the scream of burning whites. The men of the watch fell back, shielding their faces from the heat. When the light dimmed, the dead were gone. Only ash remained, black against the snow. In the stillness that followed, a voice whispered through the wind, faint, almost tender. Mercy remembered. Davos sank to his knees, the shard glowing bright in his hand. Brynja looked around, awe and terror warring in her face. What was that? He smiled through tears he hadn't felt fall. Her. Jon approached, sword still smoking from the heat. What happened here? The fire fought for us, Davos said softly, because mercy still lives. The Lord Commander said nothing, but his gaze lingered on the horizon, where the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. That day, the Night's Watch spoke of victory, but Davos knew better. The war was not won. The fire slept once more beneath the earth, waiting for the world to forget again. They buried their dead in the frozen valley, the wind keening through the passes like a dirge. The snow fell hard that day, blanketing the ashes and blood until the battlefield looked untouched, as though the horrors of the night before were but a dream. The men of the Night's Watch moved in silence, their faces pale and hollow, their black cloaks rimmed with frost. Davos Seaworth stood at the edge of the ridge, staring down where the fire had torn through the ranks of the dead. The ground was scorched black. The ice melted into strange, glassy pools that steamed even now in the bitter cold. He felt the shard of black stone warm in his palm, the faint throb like the beat of a living heart. Brynja came to stand beside him, her bow slung across her shoulder. That wasn't natural, she said quietly. Fire doesn't burn like that. Not here, not in this cold. No, Davos murmured, but it saved us all the same. She gave him a sidelong look. You think it was her again? The girl? He closed his hand around the shard. I think she's not gone as far as we thought. Jon Snow joined them then, his cloak heavy with ice. His eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep, but there was something else in them too, a flicker of wonder or fear. We'll move south at dawn, he said. The fire gave us a reprieve, but the dead are not beaten. They'll regroup. Brynja frowned. And if the fire rises again? What then? Jon's jaw tightened. Then we pray it burns for us, not against us. The days that followed were cruel. They rode south through a blizzard that swallowed the world in white. Horses stumbled and froze where they stood. Men vanished into the snow and were never seen again. The cold grew so deep that even breath seemed to freeze in the air. Davos rode at the rear, his hands numb on the reins. He thought often of the sea, of salt wind and gull cries, of warmth and motion and the endless gray waves. The north felt too still, too deathly quiet. The living did not belong here for long. When they reached the forest's edge, they found a camp of free folk waiting. The wildlings watched them warily, spears ready, their eyes hollow with hunger. A tall woman stepped forward, her face tattooed with black ink. Brynja spoke first, in the old tongue. The woman's reply was sharp, defiant. Then, after a moment, she lowered her spear. She says they saw the fire, Brynja translated. They saw a girl's shape within it, walking through the flames. They call her the Lady of Mercy. Jon's gaze darkened. A child turned to legend. So quickly the world makes gods of the dead. Davos said nothing. The wind carried a faint warmth through the trees, like a whisper. They camped that night beside a frozen stream. The men huddled close around small fires, speaking in low voices. Brynja sharpened her blade beneath a tarp of hides, while Davos sat apart, the shard in his hands. He turned it over, watching the light flicker within its depths. For a moment, he thought he saw her face reflected there, Shireen, smiling the way she had when he'd first taught her to read. Then the image shifted, and he saw something else, a mountain burning in the dark, its heart pulsing like a wound. "Mercy is fading," whispered a voice that was not his own. He looked up sharply. The camp was silent save for the crackle of fire and the groan of the wind. Brynja was watching him from across the fire. "You heard it too," she said. "Aye," Davos admitted. "She's warning us." Before they could speak again, a horn sounded in the distance. One long blast, then another. Jon emerged from his tent, sword in hand. "To arms," he shouted. Shapes moved among the trees, tall, pale figures gliding silently over the snow. The dead had found them again. Chaos erupted. Arrows flew, swords clashed, and the night filled with screams. Davos fought beside Brynja, hacking at wights that came crawling from the darkness. Their flesh was hard as frozen leather, their eyes pale and pitiless. Jon's voice rang out through the storm. "Hold the line! Fall back to the ridge!" The firelight flickered, guttered, and went out. The cold swept in like a tide. Davos stumbled, slipping on the ice. A wight lunged at him, its jaws snapping. He swung his sword wildly, cleaving it in two. Another came, and another. There were too many. Then the shard in his pocket flared to life. Light burst from his chest, searing through the darkness. The dead reeled back, their flesh cracking and blackening in the glow. The warmth surged through his limbs, driving the cold from his bones. Brynja cried out, "Davos, your hands!" He looked down. The shard burned through his glove, its surface glowing red hot. He should have felt pain, but there was none, only heat and strength. The light grew brighter until the snow around him melted in a wide circle. "Mercy," a voice whispered through the storm. "Remember Mercy." Then, as suddenly as it had come, the fire vanished. Davos collapsed, the shard cold once more. The wights had retreated, retreating into the forest, their ranks broken. Jon knelt beside him. "Are you hurt?" Davos shook his head weakly. "Not me. It's her. She's still fighting for us." The next morning, they found no trace of the dead, only ashes on the snow, black and brittle as leaves. Jon stood over the remains. "If this girl's spirit guards us," he said, "we owe her more than we can repay. But spirits burn out, same as men. We can't depend on her forever. We won't have to," Davos said quietly. "She's not meant to save us, only to remind us what we're saving." They rode south again, toward the wall, toward the war that waited there. The sky was clear now, the air sharp and still. As they neared Eastwatch, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in months. The snow glowed gold beneath its light. The men murmured prayers, some wept openly. Brynja rode beside Davos, her voice low. "You think she'll ever come back?" Davos smiled faintly. "Maybe not as we remember her, but as long as there's mercy left in men's hearts, she'll never be gone." He looked eastward, where the horizon met the frozen sea. There, just visible in the distance, a faint shimmer of red light rippled beneath the ice, soft, steady, and alive. And Davos Seaworth, who had seen gods rise and fall, kings burn and kingdoms crumble, bowed his head and whispered a prayer, not to the Seven, nor to any Lord of Light, but to a girl with a kind heart who had once saved the world with mercy. For even in a land of cold and darkness, the smallest flame can outlast the longest night. The wall loomed over them once more, vast and blue-white beneath the gray sky. Its height was a wound upon the world, a frozen monument to the labors of men long dead. The wind that swept down from its crown could cut flesh from bone, yet Davos found comfort in the sight of it. After months of battle, it stood like an anchor against the storms, cold, steadfast, eternal. Jon Snow rode ahead, his black cloak whipping behind him, and the men of the watch followed in silence. The ground beneath their horses was slick with ice, streaked with the soot of half-burned trees. The world itself seemed scarred by fire and frost alike, and though they had survived the march, every face bore the look of men who had seen the end of all things and somehow walked past it. At the gates of Eastwatch, the horns blew a weary welcome. The guards peered down, their beards thick with rime. "The Lord Commander returns," someone cried, and the Black Brothers gathered to meet them. When Davos dismounted, his legs nearly gave beneath him. He had aged years and weeks, or so it felt. Brynja helped him down, steadying his arm with a firm grip. She was wounded, her sleeve torn and stained with blood, but she said nothing of it. Jon ordered the gates closed behind them. "The dead will come again," he said, "but for now, we live." They gathered in the hall that night, the fire burning low. The warmth was a frail thing, yet after the frozen plains, it felt like the heart of the world. The survivors sat shoulder to shoulder, Night's Watch, wildlings, and men who had once called each other enemies. No one spoke of glory. There was none to claim. Brynja sat apart, her eyes distant. Davos took the bench beside her and passed her a cup of mulled wine. "Drink," he said. "You look as though you could use warmth." She smiled faintly. "I thought the fire would be enough." He glanced down at the shard of black stone resting in his hand. It no longer glowed, but sometimes, when the hall grew quiet, he thought he heard a faint hum, like the whisper of waves against a ship's hull. "Aye," he said softly, "the fire burns where it's needed. No more, no less." The following morning, the ravens came, 3 of them, black as shadows, bearing scrolls sealed with wax. One from Castle Black, one from Winterfell, and one with no mark at all, written in a hand none of the Meisters could name. Jon read them in silence, then called Davos and Brynja to his chambers. "The first speaks of battle," Jon said, handing him the scroll from Castle Black. "The dead press on the Shadow Tower. The Night's Watch is divided. Some call for retreat, others say hold fast." He handed him the second. "From the Lady of Winterfell. Sansa Stark still holds the north, though the lords grow restless. She asks for men, for grain, for hope." Then Jon turned to the final letter. "And this," he said, "came with no seal. Read it, Davos unrolled the parchment. The ink shimmered faintly, as though written in firelight. The sea remembers. The flame stirs beneath the ice. When the last dawn fails, look east. Mercy will walk again. No name, no mark. Yet the words sent a shiver down his spine. Brynja crossed her arms. Another prophecy. Haven't we had enough of those? Davos met her gaze. Maybe so. But the last prophecy saved our lives. Jon frowned. If there's truth in this, we can't ignore it. The dead grow stronger. If the fire rises once more, if there's even a chance, it may be our only hope. Brynja's jaw tightened. You mean to chase ghosts across the sea? If ghosts are all that's left to fight for, Jon said, then yes. So it was that within days, they made ready another ship, a patched-together vessel crewed by crows and wildlings alike. The sea was black glass under the pale sun, the ice groaning as they broke through. Davos stood at the prow, the wind whipping through his beard. He had not been upon a ship since Skagos, but the rhythm of the waves still felt like home. Brynja kept to the stern, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Jon stood between them, silent as the sea itself. For 3 days, they sailed eastward, through fog and floating ice. On the 4th, the water began to steam. It started as a thin mist, rising from the surface like breath from a sleeping giant. Then came the warmth, faint but growing. The ice cracked apart. Seabirds wheeled above, calling strange, high cries. By dusk, the sea glowed beneath them. Rivers of molten light flowed beneath the black waves, and the air smelled faintly of ash. Jon drew his cloak tighter. We're near Skagos. No, Davos said, pointing ahead. Look. The island had changed. The mountain that had once stood jagged and broken now burned faintly from within, its slopes streaked with red veins of fire. Smoke coiled from its summit like the breath of a waking dragon. Brynja's face hardened. She did this, she whispered. The girl. Her mercy broke the world. Or mended it, Davos said. They anchored near the shore, the heat of the water almost unbearable. The sand was black glass, the air shimmering with unseen fire. The ruins of the old temples jutted from the ground, half melted but still standing. At the mountain's base, they found the cavern where it had all begun. The entrance was wider now, glowing faintly like a forge. They descended together, torches unneeded. The walls pulsed with dim light, as though the stone itself had veins of fire. Deep within, the air trembled with the sound of a heartbeat. Davos stopped. The shard in his hand grew warm again. Do you hear it? Jon nodded. Aye. They came to a great chamber, the same where Davos had freed the demon lord once before. The altar was gone, melted to nothing. But at the center of the floor, where the stone glowed brightest, a figure knelt. Not a man of fire, not a god, a girl, Shireen. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, her grayscale gone. She wore no crown, no robe, only a simple white dress. Her skin shimmered faintly with the same light as the stone. When she looked up, her eyes were calm, ancient. Ser Davos, she said. You came. He could not move. You're alive. In a way, she said. The fire needed a heart. It chose mine. But the world is breaking again. The ice comes faster now. I cannot hold it much longer. Jon stepped forward. What must we do? Shireen smiled sadly. Remember what I taught you. Brynja frowned. Mercy? Yes, the girl said softly. Mercy for the living, mercy for the dead, and mercy for yourselves. Only that can balance the fire and the frost. The ground trembled. Cracks split the walls. Heat poured through the cavern, and from the depths below came the distant roar of something vast. Go, Shireen said. Tell them to stand together. Tell them to forgive." The fire surged higher, the light swallowing everything. Davos reached for her, but she was already fading, her form dissolving into pure flame. When the heat died, the cavern was dark again. Only the shard remained, lying on the stone where she had stood. Jon picked it up. It no longer glowed. Davos looked to the mountain's heart, then to the sea beyond. "She saved us once," he said. "She'll do it again." Brynja's voice was low, reverent. "The Lady of Mercy." They left Skagos at dawn. The sea was calm, the sky gold with the first light of day. Behind them, the mountain burned one last time, softly, like a lantern being carried into sleep. And in the east, where the world met the rising sun, the light seemed just a little warmer. The return journey from Skagos was unlike any voyage Davos Seaworth had ever made. The sea itself seemed to breathe. The waters shimmered red and gold beneath the hull, as if some vast heart beat below the waves. The Black Dawn, the ship they had salvaged from Eastwatch's harbor, moved with unearthly speed, its sails full though the wind had long since died. No man spoke of what they had seen in the mountain. The image of Shireen's face, calm and radiant as the dawn, haunted each of them. She had spoken softly, but her words had echoed in their bones. Mercy for the living, mercy for the dead, mercy for yourselves. Jon Snow stood at the prow, his hand resting upon Longclaw's hilt, the wind tangling his dark hair. His eyes were fixed northward, where storm clouds gathered like bruises over the frozen horizon. Brynja kept to the mast, sharpening her blade with slow, deliberate motions. She was no woman of faith, yet even she had bowed her head before the girl of flame. As for Davos, he stood at the helm, the shard of black stone once more warm in his pocket. It pulsed faintly, as though echoing his heartbeat. Each throb seemed to whisper, not in words, but in memory. The sound of Shireen's laughter in Dragonstone's courtyards, the light of her eyes as she learned her letters, the kindness she had shown to a smuggler's son who had lost his sons to war. When night fell, a strange light rippled across the sky, green and gold veils that shimmered like silk. The crew watched in silence, too awed to speak. It was not the cold light of the wall, nor the dead blue fire of the others. This was warm, alive, dancing. Jon broke the silence. "Do you think she did this?" Davos nodded slowly. "Aye, or maybe she is this." They reached the Bay of Seals 2 days later, their ship gliding between sheets of ice that glowed faintly beneath the water. The coast was barren and pale. Far inland, smoke rose in thin plumes, the villages burning again, perhaps, or hearth fires struggling against the dark. They found Eastwatch half buried in snow. The watchmen greeted them as ghosts returned from the sea. The ravens had carried word of their departure, but none of their return. Jon wasted no time. Messengers were sent to Castle Black and Winterfell. "The girl's words must be heeded," he said. "If mercy is all that stands between fire and frost, then mercy we shall teach." Brynja gave a short, humorless laugh. "You'll not teach mercy to the lords of Westeros, Snow. They'd sooner learn to fly." "Then we begin with the ones who can still listen," Jon replied, his voice low but steady. "The realm cannot stand divided. If the fire returns, no wall will hold it back." Davos followed him to the map room later that night. The great table was littered with candles and scrolls. Jon traced the frozen north with one finger. "The dead march again. We've seen them. The wall may not fall this year or the next, but the end will come. I thought to fight them with sword and flame. Now I think the true battle lies elsewhere." Davos leaned on the table. "Aye, in men's hearts, Jon's eyes met his. You believe her words, then? I do, Davos said. She was no priest's trick, no shadow-born thing. She was a girl who saw more of the world than any of us, and she died for it. Jon's gaze softened. Then her death won't be for nothing. They spoke long into the night, of peace and alliances, of kings and queens who might yet be swayed. The world beyond the wall still slept, but the rumble of war was never far. When dawn came, the wind shifted from the north, carrying a chill that bit to the bone. From the watchtower came the call of horns. 3 blasts, once, twice, thrice. The dead. Davos and Brynja rushed to the ramparts. In the distance, beneath the pallid sky, a dark line moved across the snow, slow, inevitable, countless. The dead were marching again. Jon joined them, Longclaw already in his hand. They move faster than before, he said. No waiting, no hesitation. They know the fire sleeps. Brynja knocked an arrow. Then we wake it. The first ranks reached the ice within the hour. Black arrows rained down, felling some, but the rest pressed on. The earth itself groaned beneath their weight. "Hold the gate!" Jon shouted. "Archers, to the walls!" The watch met the dead with steel and flame. Torches burned bright along the battlements, and for a time it seemed they might hold. Yet the numbers were endless, the cold unyielding. Davos fought beside the gate, his sword arm heavy with age. He thought of his sons, of Stannis, of Shireen. The world had taken everything from him, and still it asked for more. Then, amid the chaos, he felt the shard in his pocket grow hot. He pulled it free. The stone blazed red, brighter than the torches, brighter than the dawn itself. The heat burned through his glove, yet he did not drop it. He raised it high. A wave of light burst forth, sweeping over the battlefield. The wights halted mid-stride, frozen in place, their eyes flickering like dying embers. Jon turned, shouting over the roar. "What is it?" "The fire!" Davos cried. "She's with us!" The shard cracked in his hand. The light surged higher, spreading through the ice and snow, setting the sky ablaze. A sound like 1,000 whispers filled the air, gentle, sorrowful, and full of love. And then the flames fell. They did not burn as fire should. They washed over the dead like a tide, and where they touched, the whites turned to ash. The cold broke. The air grew still. When the light faded, the valley below was empty. The army of the dead was gone. Only silence remained. Brynja lowered her bow slowly. "Is it over?" Davos looked to the horizon. The sky above the wall was clear now, painted with streaks of gold and crimson. For now. Jon joined him at the parapet. His voice was quiet. "She saved us again." Davos nodded. "Aye, but mercy is not a sword. It's a burden. Someone will have to carry it now." Jon's gaze hardened. "Then we'll carry it together." Below them, the men of the watch cheered, though the sound was weary, hollow. They had survived another battle, but not the war. The world was changing, and they all felt it. That night, Davos sat alone before the dying embers of the fire. The shard lay on the table before him, split clean in two. Its glow was gone, yet when he touched it, it felt warm still. He whispered a sailor's prayer, not to the seven, nor to any god of light or shadow, but to the little girl who had saved them all. "Thank you, lass," he said. "We'll not forget." Beyond the wall, the wind shifted again. It was not cold this time, but soft, almost gentle. The snow glittered beneath the stars. And far to the east, across the sleeping sea, the faintest glow lingered on the horizon, a promise or perhaps a farewell. For mercy, once kindled, never truly dies. The night after the battle was one of uneasy peace. No horns sounded from the towers, no shouts echoed across the walls, only the wind, moving soft and slow as if the land itself were sleeping at last. The stars burned clear above the wall, their light sharp as the bite of cold air. In the hall at Eastwatch, the fire burned low. Davos Seaworth sat alone before it, his rough hands wrapped around a cup of ale gone half to ice. He stared into the coals and saw not flame, but memory. The mountain burning on Skagos, the sea turned red beneath the dawn, and Shireen's face shining like a beacon in the dark. The black shard lay upon the table beside him. It was no longer warm, no longer alive, yet he could not bring himself to cast it aside. It was all that remained of her, of the promise she'd made to the world. Footsteps approached behind him. Brynja, silent as a shadow, took the bench across from him. Her white hair hung loose around her shoulders, and she smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap. "You should sleep," she said. "I've done enough of that in my life," Davos murmured. "Sleep's for men who've finished their work. Mine's not done yet." Brynja leaned back, studying him through half-lidded eyes. "You think she's truly gone?" Davos glanced down at the shard. "Gone, maybe, but not lost. There's a difference." She gave a small, mirthless laugh. "That's a fine comfort for the living." "Aye, it's the only one we have left." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the wind outside. At last, Brynja spoke again. "The dead are scattered, but they'll come again. You know that." "I do," Davos said, "and when they do, we'll be ready." She gave us time. That's all any of us can give. Before dawn, Jon Snow summoned the captains and elders to the courtyard. His face was drawn, pale with exhaustion, but his voice carried with the quiet strength of command. "The wall still stands," he said. "The dead are broken for now, but their masters will not rest. We've seen what mercy can do, but mercy alone will not save us. We must carry it with steel and fire alike." The men of the watch murmured agreement. Some still trembled from what they had witnessed. Others bowed their heads in silent awe. Brynja stepped forward. "If we're to stand, we'll need the free folk beside us. I can bring them word, but they'll not follow black cloaks again without proof." Jon nodded. "Then take her with you." He gestured to Davos. The old smuggler blinked in surprise. "Me?" "You've seen more gods than most men ever will," Jon said. "And you still believe in mercy. That's what they'll need to hear." Brynja smirked. "You think the wildlings will listen to an old knight from the south?" "I think they'll listen to anyone who's looked death in the eye and lived," Jon said. So it was decided. By mid-morning, Davos and Brynja rode out from Eastwatch, heading north along the frozen coast. The snow was deep and glittering, the sky pale as milk. Seabirds cried overhead, and the wind carried the faint scent of brine. For days they rode without sight of another soul. The land grew wild, the forests ancient and thick. They crossed rivers of ice, past stone cairns carved with faces so old the features had worn away. At night, they made small fires and spoke little. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had seen too much and needed no words to understand each other. On the 5th day, they came to a village half buried in snow. Smoke rose from a few huts, but most were empty, their doors hanging loose, their hearths cold. Brynja dismounted, scanning the ruins. This was Skagari's clan. I knew some of them. "Dead?" Davos asked. "Gone," she said. Either they fled south or joined the dead themselves. they searched the houses. Inside one, Davos found a small wooden carving upon a table, a child's toy shaped like a stag with wings. He brushed the snow from it and felt his throat tighten. "She's remembered, even here," he said softly. Brynja looked at the toy. A girl of fire and mercy. Aye, the wildlings will tell her story for 1,000 years. By the time they reached the Frostfangs, the weather had turned. Snow fell so thick they could barely see a horse's length ahead. They found shelter in a cave overlooking a frozen valley, and there they made camp. That night, Davos dreamed. He stood upon the deck of a ship, the sea calm and silver beneath a sky full of stars. A light glimmered on the horizon, faint but steady. As he watched, it grew brighter until it filled the world, and in that light, he heard her voice. "Mercy is not a gift, Sir Davos. It's a choice. Remember that." He woke with tears on his cheeks and the taste of salt on his tongue. The cave was dark, the fire low. Brynja slept beside him, her hand upon her knife even in rest. Outside, the storm had passed. The moon hung full and bright above the valley. Davos rose quietly and stepped outside. The air was bitter cold, but clear. He could see for miles, the snowfields glimmering like glass, the distant shimmer of the wall to the south, and far to the east, beyond the horizon, a faint red glow pulsed beneath the clouds. He took the shard of stone from his pocket. For the first time in weeks, it felt warm again. Brynja joined him, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Another dream?" He nodded. "A reminder. From her?" "Aye." Brynja followed his gaze to the distant light. "Then the fire's not done with us yet?" "No," Davos said quietly, "nor we with it." They rode at dawn. The light followed them as they went, a faint red shimmer that seemed to dance upon the snow. In every village they passed, the wildlings came out to meet them. Men and women, children and elders, all carrying torches. Some bowed, others knelt, whispering the same words again and again. The Lady of Mercy. They had not forgotten. By the time Davos and Brynja returned to Eastwatch, spring's first thaw had begun. The sea cracked open, and the ice melted in great slabs, drifting out to the horizon. Jon met them at the gate, his face grim but hopeful. "Well?" "They'll come," Brynja said. "Every clan that still draws breath. They've heard her name. They'll fight." Jon looked to Davos. "And you?" "I'll fight too," Davos said, "but not with hatred, not with fire, with mercy." Jon smiled faintly. "Then perhaps there's hope yet." That night, the fires burned high along the wall. Men and women, black and wildling alike, stood side by side, their shadows stretching across the snow. The air was cold, but the light was warm, and high above, beyond the clouds, a single star shone brighter than all the rest, red as flame, steady as a heartbeat. Davos watched it until dawn, whispering her name, Shireen. For though the dead still marched, though the winter still reigned, the world had been changed forever. The fire no longer burned for destruction, nor the ice for death. Between them, mercy had found its place, and in that fragile balance, there was life. The long winter pressed on, but the world had begun to stir. Snowmelt trickled down from the Frostfangs, carving dark lines through the ice. Ravens returned to the trees, and though their cries were hoarse and cold, they sounded like a promise of life. Even the sea beyond Eastwatch was waking, heaving beneath sheets of thinning ice. The wall still stood, scarred but unbroken, and in its shadow, men were changing. Davos Seaworth had lived long enough to see miracles twisted into ruin, and good men turned to ashes for want of mercy. Yet when he walked the courtyard of Eastwatch and saw black-cloaked brothers sparring beside wildlings who once had been their sworn foes, he felt something he'd thought long buried in him, a quiet, stubborn hope. He spent his days among the men, helping where he could. The younger crows called him Sir Onion, laughing as they said it, but the laughter held respect. He showed them how to mend ropes, how to patch sails, how to judge the tide by the wind's cry. He was no knight of legend, but the world had had its fill of legends. It needed sailors. It needed hands that built instead of burned. Brynja, the wildling woman, had become their captain of scouts. She moved through the forests like wind through pine, fierce and watchful, her bow always close. She had seen more death than any of them, and though she smiled rarely, the men trusted her. They called her the White Wolf of Skagos, though she cared little for names. And Jon Snow, the Lord Commander who had once been a boy of honor, had grown into something harder, quieter. The battles had left their mark on him, as fire leaves its scar upon stone. Yet when he spoke, his words carried weight. He was no longer a man searching for his place in the world. He had become the North's heart, steady and relentless. The nights, though, belonged to Davos. When darkness fell and the men slept, he would sit upon the wall and look east. There, far beyond the edge of the world, a faint glow still lingered beneath the clouds, the same soft red light that had guided them back from Skagos. Some nights it was bright as dawn, others it was barely a breath, yet it never vanished entirely. He knew what it meant. She was still there, not as a child of flesh and bone, but as something greater, an echo, a memory of mercy bound into the bones of the world. One evening, when the moon hung thin as a sickle, Davos found Jon upon the ramparts. The young man stood with his cloak drawn tight, gazing toward the sea. "They'll come again," Jon said quietly. "The dead, or something worse. The North has a way of testing every oath men make." "Aye," Davos replied. "But we'll meet them when they do." Jon's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "Do you ever wonder what she's become?" "All the time," Davos said. "Sometimes I think she's the wind. Sometimes I think she's the fire beneath the sea. But most times, I think she's just watching, making sure we remember." "Remember what?" He smiled faintly. "That mercy isn't weakness. It's the only thing worth fighting for." Jon said nothing, but Davos saw a shadow lift from him, like a weight easing. The younger man had carried too much loss, too much blood on his hands. Perhaps the thought of mercy offered him a measure of peace. In the weeks that followed, the wildlings came, first by the dozens, then by the hundreds. They brought their families, their herds, their wounded. They came not to kneel, but to stand beside the night's watch, shoulder to shoulder. For the first time in living memory, the wall was not a divide, but a bridge. Davos helped build the camps, hauling timber and stone until his hands bled. The air rang with the sounds of work, hammers on nails, axes on wood. The wall echoed with life again. But peace in the North was a fragile thing. Scouts began returning with tales of movement in the far wastes, armies of men, not dead but living, marching under banners of black and crimson, raiders who called themselves the Sons of Ash. They burned villages, took food and women, and left behind only ash and bone. When the first of their victims staggered through Eastwatch's gates, a girl no older than 10, her clothes burned, her eyes blank, Davos felt the old weight of guilt settle in his chest. He had seen too many innocents suffer while kings waged their wars. "They follow the fire," Brynja said grimly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the horizon. but not the kind the girl gave us. These men burn because they like the smell of it. Jon summoned his captains that night. If they reach the coast, they'll undo everything we've built. Mercy won't stop them. Then perhaps we show them the other kind, Brynja said. Davos remained silent, his hands folded on the table. When Jon turned to him, he spoke at last. Mercy isn't just forgiveness. It's knowing when to kill so others can live. If these sons of ash burn without reason, then mercy for the living means ending them. Jon nodded grimly. Then we ride. They left Eastwatch with 200 men, Watch brothers, wildlings, and a handful of Southron knights who had come north seeking redemption. The wind was fierce, and the snow fell in great heavy flakes that stung the eyes. They rode through forests of ice and open fields of white, where the sun barely rose before it vanished again. They found the raiders 3 days later. The Sons of Ash had set up camp in the ruins of a fishing village. Smoke rose from the huts, and the air stank of burning flesh. Their leader, a tall man with red scars across his face, wore armor blackened by fire. He held a sword that glowed faintly orange, as if its metal still remembered the forge. Jon offered them surrender. The man laughed. "You think your mercy frightens us?" he sneered. "Your gods are dead. The fire is ours now." What followed was swift and brutal. The Sons of Ash fought like beasts, their screams echoing across the ice. Yet the men of the wall fought harder. Brynja's arrows found their marks, and Jon's sword cut through the red fire like a blade of moonlight. Davos held the line with the younger men, his old arms burning with effort but steady as the tide. When it was done, the snow was black with ash and blood. Jon stood over the fallen leader, his breath misting in the air. "Your fire dies here." The man spat blood, grinning. "You cannot kill fire, Stark. It only sleeps." And then he laughed, even as the life left his body. That night, as they burned the bodies, Davos felt a strange warmth on the wind. He looked eastward, and there, beyond the horizon, the faint red light pulsed once more. Brynja came to stand beside him. "She's watching again," she said. "Aye," Davos whispered, "and she's telling us something." "What's that?" "That mercy isn't peace. It's a choice we must keep making every day, no matter the cost." Brynja nodded slowly. "Then we'll keep making it." The fire crackled low, and the wind carried its smoke out across the sea. And in that moment, Davos thought he heard a voice within the flame, not crying, not commanding, but simply singing, soft and sad and full of light. Shireen's song, carried on the wind. The world was far from saved. The cold still crept south, and the fire still stirred beneath the waves. But men remembered her now, and that was enough. For mercy, once taught, has a way of teaching itself again. The morning after the battle was as still as death. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky above the frost fangs burned a soft crimson, as if the heavens themselves remembered the blood spilled upon the ice. The air was sharp, the silence complete. Even the wind had forgotten how to move. Davos Seaworth stood upon the ridge where the Sons of Ash had fallen. The world stretched endless before him, white and gray and boundless. His breath plumed in the cold as he looked upon the dead. Hundreds of blackened forms lay strewn across the frozen fields, their bodies twisted in strange shapes, as though they had burned from within. The fire had claimed them utterly. No spark of mercy had lingered in their eyes. Brynja came to stand beside him, her bow slung across her back. She moved like a shadow among the smoke. "It's done," she said softly. Davos nodded, though there was no triumph in it. "Aye, done, but it never feels like victory." She gazed down at the field. The girl's fire burned them. I saw it in their deaths, the same red light as Skagos. She gave us her mercy, Davos said, and we used it for killing. Brynja's eyes flicked toward him. Sometimes killing is mercy. He said nothing to that. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the world could not tell the difference anymore. By nightfall, the men had finished their grim work. They built pyres upon the ice, and the flames climbed high, painting the snow in shades of gold and scarlet. Jon Snow stood before the fire, his cloak whipped by the wind. His men watched in silence as he spoke. "We've seen what mercy can do," he said, his voice carrying over the crackling flames. "It saves the living, and it releases the dead. We'll carry that lesson south. We'll carry it home." He looked to Davos then, and for a moment, the smuggler saw in Jon's eyes what Stannis once held there, a light that was neither fire nor shadow, but something between. They rode south the next morning, the fires still smoldering behind them. The sun broke through the clouds for the first time in weeks, casting long golden rays across the snow. Men lifted their faces to the light and felt warmth again, faint though it was. By the time they reached Eastwatch, ravens had flown ahead of them. Word of the victory, if victory it could be called, had spread already. The wall was alive with talk. Some said the gods had returned. Others whispered that the girl of fire still walked among the living. Davos climbed the steps to the wall's top and looked out across the sea. The horizon shimmered faintly, a thin line of red light beneath the gray clouds. It seemed closer than before. Brynja joined him, her fur cloak drawn tight. "She's restless," she said. "You can feel it in the air, the fire under the ice." He nodded slowly. "Aye, the world's not done with her yet." For days they waited. Scouts were sent north and east, but none returned with news. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of salt and smoke. The sea began to thaw. Great slabs of ice broke apart, drifting like white ships toward the horizon. Then, on the fourth night, the sky came alive. It began as a faint glimmer over the eastern sea, a thin line of gold that spread into red, then white. The aurora shimmered across the heavens, brighter than any dawn. Men poured from the halls and watchtowers to see it, their eyes wide. "Fire in the sky!" someone shouted. "The lady's flame!" Davos felt the shard of black stone grow warm in his pocket. The same warmth he'd known before every miracle, before every loss. He took it out and held it to the light. It pulsed once, twice, then cracked in his hand. A voice followed, soft as the sea's whisper. "Remember." And the light above them flared brighter still, so bright that for a moment it seemed the sun itself had returned. Men fell to their knees, weeping. The wall glowed like a mirror of fire. The frost upon its stones melted, and the air filled with the scent of salt and summer grass. Jon Snow stood at Davos's side, his face lifted to the light. "What does it mean?" Davos could barely speak. "It means she's still with us." Then, as swiftly as it had come, the light began to fade. The sky dimmed to gray, and the sea went still. Yet something in the air had changed. The cold was no longer cruel. The wind no longer bit. The world had softened, if only a little. When dawn came, it brought color back to the world. The snow was not white, but blue and gold. The sun rose clear, and the men of the watch stood in silence, their hearts heavy with something they could not name. Brynja found Davos near the gate later that morning. "She's gone for good this time," she said. Davos shook his head. "Not gone. Resting, like the sea between tides." He looked down at the shard's remains. They were no longer black, but clear as glass, smooth and cold. He held them up, and for a moment he thought he saw a small reflection in them, a girl's smile, fleeting as a flame's last flicker. He tucked the pieces into his pouch. "The North will remember her," he said, "but not as a god, as what she was, a child who showed us what mercy means." Brynja gave a faint, wistful smile. "And what does it mean, Sir Onion?" "That we keep trying," Davos said, "even when it's hopeless, especially then." He turned his eyes toward the horizon, where the sky met the sea. "One day the fire will rise again, not to destroy, but to warm. And when it does, maybe the world will be ready for it." In the seasons that followed, the snows began to lessen. Streams broke through the ice, feeding the rivers again. The free folk settled along the wall's shadow, raising homes of wood and stone. The Night's Watch rebuilt its keeps, not as fortresses against man or monster, but as beacons for travelers who braved the North. And through it all, the tale of the Lady of Mercy spread. The singers told of a girl born of kings and fire, who gave her life to save both the living and the dead. Some called her a saint, others a witch, but all agreed her flame had burned brighter than any crown. Davos grew old as the tale grew long. He lived to see the first spring thaw reach Eastwatch, the sea once more alive with ships and gulls. He spent his last years on the ramparts, watching the sunrise, whispering her name. When he died, they found him with a small piece of clear stone in his hand, a faint smile upon his lips. On that day, the sea was calm, and the sky burned red over the horizon. Some said it was the lady welcoming him home. And so it was that mercy, once a fragile light in the heart of a child, became the song of the North, the fire that neither ice nor time could ever extinguish. For even in a world of endless night, a single kindness can be enough to set the dawn in motion.